Welcome to Warfront Global. If you are someone who studies history carefully, someone who wants to understand how wars reshape economies and power, then take a moment and subscribe to the channel. Think of it like a quiet reminder to a wise person who has seen many decades of world events. Stay with us. The story is just beginning. And while you're here, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching this video from today? Because this conflict is no longer just regional. Its consequences are global. Now, let us begin. On the 15th day of the war, a single launch forced military analysts to rethink the direction of the entire conflict. For 2 weeks, the dominant narrative had been simple. American and Israeli air power was striking Iranian infrastructure across the country. Missile launch sites were destroyed, military bases were damaged. Analysts began repeating a familiar conclusion: Iran's offensive capability was steadily shrinking. But wars rarely follow simple narratives. On March 15th, Iran launched a missile that had never before been used in combat. The weapon was the Sejjil, a two-stage, solid-fuel ballistic missile designed to travel long distances with minimal launch preparation. Unlike many older missiles that rely on liquid fuel, the Sejjil can remain stored and ready for immediate launch. Liquid fuel missiles require visible preparation. Fuel trucks arrive, systems are checked, and satellites can detect the activity. Solid fuel removes that warning window. The result is a missile that can be fired with almost no advance notice. Its estimated range reaches around 2,500 kilometers, placing major strategic locations within reach. Its warhead can carry a payload large enough to cause serious damage depending on the target. Yet the most important element may not be its power. It is the timing. Iran did not reveal this weapon at the start of the war. It waited until the 15th day, after weeks of heavy airstrikes and after many observers believed Iranian capabilities had already been weakened. Then the Sejjil appeared, accompanied by multiple waves of missile launches. For military planners, that timing sends a clear message. If a weapon this significant was held in reserve until day 15, the conflict may be far from reaching its final stage: the interceptor economy. As the 15th day of the war passed, military analysts began focusing on a number that rarely appears in public discussions. It was not the number of missiles launched. It was not the number of targets destroyed. The number that mattered most was the interceptor count. Modern missile defense systems are often described as technological shields. Radar networks detect incoming threats. Computers calculate trajectories. Interceptor missiles launch within seconds and destroy hostile projectiles high above cities. To the public, this system appears almost automatic. But behind the technology lies a powerful economic reality. Every interceptor represents an industrial product. It requires precision manufacturing, advanced electronics, specialized guidance systems, and complex supply chains. These components cannot be produced instantly, no matter how much money governments spend. Factories operate at a fixed speed, and that speed becomes critical during long conflicts. Israel's defense network is designed as a layered system. Different interceptors are used for different types of threats. Short-range rockets are handled by Iron Dome. Medium-range threats can be intercepted by David's Sling. Long-range ballistic missiles are addressed by the Arrow system. Each layer adds protection, but each layer also consumes resources. When Iran launched 7 waves of missiles in a single day, the defense system had to respond repeatedly. Radar systems activated again and again. Command centers calculated new trajectories. Interceptors launched into the sky to meet incoming targets. Many of those interceptions were successful, but success carries a cost. Each interceptor used during the defense represents millions of dollars in equipment. More importantly, each interceptor used must eventually be replaced. Replacement takes time. Defense contractors cannot simply double production overnight. Supply chains must deliver specialized materials. Skilled engineers must assemble guidance systems. Quality control procedures must verify each unit before delivery. This production rhythm creates a strategic imbalance in prolonged conflicts. Offensive missiles can sometimes be produced more quickly than defensive interceptors. Even when they are not cheaper to build, they often require fewer complex components. This imbalance creates what military economists call cost asymmetry. If one side can launch missiles faster than the other side can replace interceptors, the defensive system gradually becomes strained. That strain does not appear immediately. At first, interception rates remain high. Cities remain protected. Radar systems continue to track incoming threats effectively. But slowly, something changes. Commanders begin conserving interceptors. Instead of engaging every single incoming object, they begin prioritizing the most dangerous threats. Missiles heading toward critical infrastructure or large population centers receive immediate attention. Others may be monitored rather than intercepted. These choices are difficult but necessary when resources begin to tighten. Iran's strategy appears designed to exploit this exact pressure. Launching missiles in multiple waves across long periods of time forces the defense system to remain active continuously. Each wave requires new calculations and new interceptor launches. The goal is not always to cause maximum destruction. Sometimes the goal is simply to force the defender to spend resources. 7 waves in one day stretched the defensive system across many hours. Radar operators must remain alert, missile batteries must stay prepared, interceptors must continue launching as new threats appear. This transforms warfare into a financial equation. Every offensive missile forces the defender to decide whether to spend an interceptor. Over time, those decisions accumulate. As the war entered its 3rd week, reports from regional media suggested that Israel's interceptor inventory had begun to shrink faster than expected. The stockpile had not been exhausted, but the margin was narrowing, and the introduction of the Sejjil missile made the situation even more complicated. Because solid fuel missiles launch with very little warning, the opportunity to destroy them before launch becomes extremely limited. This means more incoming missiles reach the interception stage. More incoming missiles mean more interceptor launches. And more interceptor launches mean faster depletion of defensive resources. For military planners, this dynamic creates a difficult strategic question. If the war continues for weeks or months, the interceptor economy becomes as important as the missile inventory itself. In modern conflict, victory is not determined only by firepower. It is often determined by who can sustain their systems the longest. And as the Sejjil entered the battlefield, the world began to realize that this war might last far longer than anyone initially expected. The strait that controls the global economy. While missiles were flying across the Middle East, another battlefield was quietly shaping the future of the conflict. It was not located in the sky. It was located in the water, the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow maritime corridor sits between Iran and Oman, connecting the Persian Gulf to the wider world. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 33 kilometers wide. Yet through this small passage flows one of the most important resources in the global economy. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply moves through this channel every day. Tankers carrying crude oil from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Iraq must pass through this waterway before reaching global markets. Energy systems across Asia, Europe, and parts of the Americas depend heavily on this steady flow. Because of this dependence, the Strait of Hormuz has always been more than a shipping route. It is a strategic pressure point. In wartime, controlling or threatening this corridor can influence global markets far beyond the battlefield itself. When the current conflict began, the immediate military focus centered on missile strikes and air campaigns. But as the war continued, attention gradually shifted toward maritime security. Insurance companies began adjusting their risk calculations. Shipping firms started evaluating the safety of sending vessels through the region. Energy traders watched every development carefully. The reason was simple. In modern markets, disruption does not need to be permanent to cause serious economic consequences. Even the possibility of disruption can move prices dramatically. When shipping companies believe a waterway may become dangerous, they begin charging higher transport rates. Insurance premiums increase to cover potential war damage. Some vessels delay departure entirely until conditions become clearer. These changes ripple outward through the global economy. Oil prices respond first. When supply routes appear uncertain, traders anticipate shortages. Even if the physical supply remains stable for the moment, expectations alone can drive prices upward. Higher oil prices then influence many other sectors. Transportation becomes more expensive. Airlines face rising jet fuel costs. Shipping companies raise freight charges. Manufacturing firms pay more for energy used in production. Eventually, these rising costs reach ordinary consumers. Food distribution becomes more expensive. Delivery services raise prices. Businesses pass higher fuel costs to customers. For entrepreneurs and business leaders, this chain reaction represents a critical risk. Geopolitical instability in a single maritime corridor can influence supply chains across entire continents. During the 3rd week of the war, several governments began discussing the possibility of multinational naval operations to ensure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. However, building such coalitions is rarely simple. Each country must weigh its own political interests, military commitments, and economic exposure. Some nations depend heavily on Gulf energy supplies, but prefer diplomatic solutions rather than direct military involvement. Others must consider domestic public opinion before deploying naval forces into an active conflict zone. As a result, decisions that appear straightforward on paper often become complicated in reality. While diplomats debated and governments calculated their options, the markets continued watching the same narrow stretch of water. Because in global economics, perception can be almost as powerful as physical disruption. A missile launched across the sky may cause immediate headlines. But the fear of instability in a strategic shipping route can quietly reshape the financial calculations of governments, investors, and businesses around the world. And as the Sejjil missile entered the war, analysts began to ask whether the conflict might soon expand beyond land and air, into the economic lifeline of global energy itself. The silent battlefield. By the 3rd week of the war, analysts around the world began discussing a possibility that had not yet appeared in headlines. A battlefield that cannot be seen. Not missiles, not fighter jets, not naval fleets, but code. For decades, both the United States and Iran have invested heavily in cyber warfare capabilities. These programs rarely appear in public military briefings, but security experts understand their importance. Cyber units are designed to penetrate digital systems, observe infrastructure quietly, and, if necessary, disrupt it. In earlier conflicts, cyber operations were often limited to espionage. Governments used them to collect intelligence, monitor communications, and understand the structure of foreign networks. But over the past 20 years, cyber capabilities have expanded far beyond intelligence gathering. Modern cyber units can target industrial control systems. These are the digital platforms that operate power plants, water treatment facilities, pipelines, and transportation networks. They control the basic infrastructure that keeps modern societies functioning. When these systems are disrupted, the consequences can spread quickly. Electricity grids can shut down, transportation networks can stall, financial systems can experience interruptions. In highly developed economies, where daily life depends heavily on digital infrastructure, these disruptions can create immediate economic stress. This is why cyber warfare has become one of the most sensitive areas of modern conflict. Unlike missiles, cyber attacks are often difficult to trace with complete certainty. A missile carries a visible trajectory and physical evidence. Cyber operations can be routed through multiple systems, leaving behind ambiguous signatures. This uncertainty complicates political responses. If a power grid fails during wartime, determining whether it was caused by technical failure, sabotage, or cyber intrusion may take days or weeks. During that time, governments must decide how to respond without full information. Both Iran and the United States understand this danger. Over the past 15 years, Iranian cyber units have demonstrated the ability to conduct sustained digital operations against foreign targets. American Cyber Command, meanwhile, possesses some of the most advanced offensive cyber capabilities in the world. Yet despite these capabilities, neither side has openly deployed large-scale cyber attacks during the conflict so far. This restraint appears intentional. Military strategists recognize that cyber escalation could push the conflict into a much more unpredictable phase. Conventional warfare, even when destructive, follows certain patterns that governments understand. Cyber warfare introduces far greater uncertainty. For example, shutting down a power grid in a major city could affect hospitals, financial systems, transportation, and emergency services simultaneously. The resulting disruption could produce political consequences that spread far beyond the original military objective. This creates a form of mutual deterrence. Both sides know they possess powerful cyber capabilities. Both sides also know that using them aggressively could trigger retaliation that damages civilian infrastructure. As long as these capabilities remain unused, they function as a silent warning. But the longer the war continues, the more pressure builds. Every additional missile strike increases tension. Every new escalation creates incentives for the opposing side to search for alternative tools. For now, the Sejjil missile represents a conventional escalation. It is visible. It is measurable. It follows the established rules of military confrontation. Cyber warfare does not follow those rules. If the conflict ever crosses that threshold, the consequences could reach far beyond the battlefield. Financial networks, supply chains, and global markets could all experience disruptions. For business leaders and entrepreneurs, this possibility represents a new type of risk. The modern global economy depends heavily on digital infrastructure functioning smoothly every day. When that infrastructure becomes part of a military contest, economic stability becomes much harder to predict. As the Sejjil missile entered the war, many observers focused on its range and destructive capability. But in the broader strategic picture, the missile may represent something else. Not the final stage of the conflict, but a signal that the war may be moving toward its next phase. A phase where the most powerful weapons may not explode in the sky at all, but move silently through the networks that power the modern world.